I never anticipated how drastically my life would change in an instant. You can yearn for something for years, only to realize that once it happens, it's not exactly what you envisioned. That realization hit me the moment I first held my son, my long-awaited child. He was just minutes old, yet a sense of confusion gripped my chest. I should have felt overwhelming joy, kissed my wife's forehead, and thanked fate for making me a father. But instead, dread quietly crept in. His features, his hair, eyes, the curve of his lips, didn't look like mine. I tried to convince myself that newborns often look generic and that it must be the hospital lighting playing tricks on me, but something felt off. Rachel, exhausted and drenched in sweat, lay back on the pillow. The delivery had been hard on her, so I swallowed my doubts and forced a smile. "He's here, R.A. Our prayers have been answered." She nodded silently, her eyes filled not just with love, but also with something else, caution, as though she was watching me closely. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't quite right. Rachel and I had been married for just over 5 years. For the first 5, we struggled to conceive. We consulted numerous specialists, sat through countless tests with fertility doctors, endocrinologists, and counselors, all hoping someone could pinpoint what was wrong. We examined every angle: her hormone levels, my sperm count, her ovulation cycle. Each test came back normal. Nothing was wrong. Yet, month after month, year after year, we faced heartbreak when her period arrived. Our desperation grew with every failed attempt. About 3 years into our marriage, Rachel came to me with an idea. She had that anxious expression she got whenever she was worried I'd oppose her. "Maybe we should consider using a donor," she said softly. Her words hit me hard. I knew exactly what she meant: donor sperm. Even though there was no medical evidence to suggest I was the problem, the thought that she might question my fertility stung. But more than that, I didn't want our child to come from someone else's DNA. I wanted our child to be ours. I wanted him to have my grandmother's green eyes or my father's stubborn chin. The idea of raising a child with another man's genes unsettled me. My response came out more harshly than I intended, but I tried to soften it. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm sorry, Rachel. That's not an option for me. Let's keep trying. One of these days, God willing, it'll work." She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching mine. "But it's been years, and the doctors say everything's fine. Why can't we?" "No," I said more firmly, though guilt gnawed at me. "I can't do that." She didn't argue further. The quiet acceptance in her demeanor should have told me she had a plan, but I pushed the thought aside, content that I had the final say. So we continued trying, month after month, heartbreak after heartbreak. Then one day, Rachel missed her period and tested positive. I dropped to my knees when I saw the test result, tears filling my eyes. 5 years of prayers answered. It was the happiest day of my life. The pregnancy progressed with the usual challenges: nausea, fatigue, but Rachel insisted on going to the appointments alone. "You're working so hard, Daniel." "It's just a routine ultrasound," she reassured me. I wanted to be there with her, but I felt guilty about missing work, so I let her go alone, never suspecting there was another reason. Then came the big day. After a grueling labor, Jason was born. His first cry filled the room. When the nurse placed him in my arms, I was hit with an unexpected unease. I tried to ignore it, but it didn't go away. At home, I tried to bury my doubts in fatherly devotion, feeding him, changing diapers, singing lullabies. Rachel rested, her eyes lighting up at Jason, but flickering with worry whenever she looked at me. I dismissed it as postpartum anxiety. Still, something gnawed at me. Jason's hair was darker, his features unfamiliar. His ears were shaped differently than mine. "Babies change," I told myself, hoping to see some trace of me in him. But that moment never came. Weeks turned into months, and the more Jason grew, the less he resembled me. It wasn't just a small difference. It reached the point where strangers would comment, "He must take after your wife's side of the family," they'd say. Is your wife's father from a different ethnicity? I hated these comments, forcing a smile while my stomach churned. Meanwhile, Rachel became oddly protective of him, almost distant from me. There were subtle signs that she was keeping him away from me, even in the smallest ways. It was as if she were guarding him, flinching whenever I looked at Jason for too long. I started to wonder if she had gone behind my back and used a sperm donor. It seemed like the only explanation that made sense, but I pushed it away. Rachel wouldn't do that, would she? Yet, as time passed, the thought haunted me more and more. If that was the case, why wouldn't she just tell me? She knew how desperately I wanted a child. Maybe she thought I wouldn't accept it. My anxiety grew, overshadowing the joy I should have been feeling as a new father. Then, one evening, as I was tidying up the living room, I noticed Rachel staring at a photograph on her phone. She looked haunted. It was a picture of an older man with a strong jaw, dark wavy hair, and a slight smirk. Before I could glimpse the name on the screen, she quickly turned off her phone. I pretended not to notice, but that fleeting image unsettled me deeply. Could that be the sperm donor? A few nights later, around 2 a.m., Jason woke up crying. I picked him up from the crib, pressed him to my shoulder, and gently hummed a lullaby. In the soft glow of the nightlight, I studied his small, sleeping face. And suddenly, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, an unsettling resemblance to someone I'd never even considered.
A couple of years before Rachel and I reconnected, I had heard that her ex-husband, Ethan, had tragically passed away in an accident. She never shared many details with me, only that it had been a painful experience for her. At first, I pushed the thought out of my mind, scolding myself for being irrational. It's impossible, I told myself. Ethan's been gone for a long time. You're just letting your mind run wild. Yet, there was something about that familiar little nose and those distinct eyebrows that triggered a vivid image of Ethan's face, one Rachel had shown me in an old, faded photograph. I couldn't forget his intense gaze. It had always made me uncomfortable seeing Rachel with him. But now that he was gone, how could he still be a threat? Even so, I couldn't shake the unease building in me. I grew restless, so much so that I found myself pacing around the house, and then retreating to the living room, sitting on the couch and staring into the darkness for hours. Finally, I decided to investigate. It was a decision born of paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. While Rachel ran errands, I scoured the house. I searched through drawers and rummaged through old boxes in the attic, each time convincing myself that I was being ridiculous. You won't find anything. Just stop, I told myself. But my curiosity pushed me forward. Then, in a dusty, broken trunk tucked away in the farthest corner of the basement, I found something chilling. A set of papers with the label Genome Preservation caught my eye. The date on them was years before Rachel and I had gotten married. The name at the top read Ethan Anderson, and the form included details about sperm preservation, posthumous use, and conditions for storage. There were disclaimers, one of which clearly stated, "Release only to spouse or authorized partner named below." My hands trembled as I held the folder. Ethan's sperm had been preserved for Rachel to use, and it seemed that she had visited the cryo bank multiple times for consultations, including during the time we were actively trying to conceive. I felt a wave of nausea and dizziness crash over me. I could barely comprehend what I was reading. Was it true? Had Rachel gone to such extreme lengths? She had deliberately chosen to impregnate herself with Ethan's sperm, and all while we were still married. The realization was a punch to the gut. Anger, betrayal, horror, heartbreak. It all hit me at once. My hands shook so violently I could hardly hold the papers. The idea that she had used my desperation to have a child to manipulate me into this twisted situation made my stomach churn. I held on to the papers like they were some kind of evidence. My mind raced, and I felt a surge of panic. Should I confront her now? But another part of me, some small piece of reason, urged me to wait. I needed more information. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I acted. The baby's first birthday was just around the corner, and I resolved to gather everything I could before the truth came crashing down. Over the following days, I became more withdrawn. Rachel noticed my distance, but I forced a smile and lied, saying everything was fine. Late at night, while she slept, I went through her financial records, and what I found made my blood run cold. Payments had been made to Northwest Cryogenics. Sums that lined up with the dates of Rachel's visits to the cryobank. The truth was unfolding before my eyes. Rachel had arranged for the sperm preservation and had even undergone a procedure at a fertility clinic that worked with the cryobank long before she ever told me she was pregnant. I barely slept, consumed with anger and confusion. How could she do this? How could someone I trusted manipulate me like this? I had always supported her, even when I had no idea what was really happening. But now, everything had changed. The man I had grown to love, the child I had raised, were no longer part of the picture. This wasn't my baby. Jason's first birthday came, a day that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it was drenched in tension. The sky was overcast, and rain was expected. Rachel had planned a small gathering for the occasion, just her parents, a few friends, and us. Jason was getting ready to smash his birthday cake into his face, but my mind was elsewhere. I had a plan. By the afternoon, I would have the legal paperwork to expose Rachel for what she had done. I was going to confront her with the truth, the undeniable evidence of her deceit. As guests started to arrive, I remained silent, my thoughts heavy with what I was about to do. Rachel's parents greeted Jason with affection, and her mother cooed, "My precious grandson is one today." But I kept my emotions under control, letting the moment pass. Around 2:30 p.m., we sang Happy Birthday, and Jason clapped his tiny hands with a smile on his face. Rachel looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Was it guilt? I felt a pang of doubt in my chest, but I pushed it aside. She had orchestrated this entire deception. It was time for her to face the consequences. We cut the cake, and the birthday pictures were taken. But for me, everything was different now. It was only a matter of time before Rachel's world came crashing down. It was a tense moment when Rachel turned to me. "Daniel," she said, her voice gentle, "do you want to say something?" She probably expected a warm toast or some kind words, but my chest felt like it was going to explode. I cleared my throat and looked at the group. Yes, I finally managed, my voice a bit shaky. I need to share something important, something about Jason's paternity. I could see the shock on Rachel's face, and her mother's eyebrows shot up in surprise. One of our friends coughed awkwardly, but Rachel forced a nervous laugh. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" she asked, trying to play it off. I didn't let her finish. "I know," I said, my anger seeping into my words. "I know about Ethan's sperm, Rachel." The words felt like they cut through the air as I spoke. "I found the documents in the basement, the cryobank records, the bills, the procedures. I know Jason isn't mine." The room went completely still. Rachel's parents exchanged confused glances. Rachel's face went pale, her lips parting as if trying to say something, but no words came out. Then, it felt like the entire room erupted in chaos. "What is this nonsense?" Linda, Rachel's mother, demanded. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. "What do you mean he's not yours?" Rachel's eyes started to fill with tears. "Daniel, please," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. "Can we talk about this privately? This is Jason's birthday." But she couldn't get another word out as her father, George, snapped at me. "You're lying. That baby is my grandson. How dare you do this now of all times?" I refused to back down. "It's not a lie," I said, pulling out a folder from my briefcase. "Here's the cryobank contract with Ethan's name. Here's a fertility procedure record from a year before Jason was born. These are the medical bills for the procedure. And here, I have the blood test results showing that I'm not Jason's biological father." I held up the papers for everyone to see. The guests stared in shock. Rachel looked like she was going to collapse. The air was thick with tension, and Jason, completely unaware of what was going on, tried to smear frosting onto Rachel's sleeve. George, shaking with rage, looked at Rachel. "Tell me this is a misunderstanding," he said. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it, tears falling down her face. It's complicated," she said slowly. I I used Ethan's sperm. Linda gasped, horrified. When were you going to tell us? She cried out. You used your ex-husband's sperm? Rachel sobbed, trying to explain herself. I didn't think you'd ever accept a donor, she said between sobs. We wanted a child so badly, and I didn't know what else to do. Ethan was already gone. I didn't cheat on you, but I was done. You lied to me. I spat, my voice thick with disgust. You let me believe Jason was mine throughout the pregnancy. You had me sign the birth certificate, making me the legal father. That's paternity fraud, Rachel. Rachel collapsed to the floor, clutching Jason tightly, her tears soaking into his clothes. Daniel, please, she begged. We can fix this. I was going to tell you, but I was afraid you'd leave me. I took a step back, my fists clenched. It doesn't matter now, I said, my voice cold. I've already filed for divorce. I'm suing you for paternity fraud. You've tricked me into paying for medical bills, forging my fatherhood status. It's over. Rachel screamed in desperation as I turned to leave. Her mother tried to block me, hissing, What kind of man are you? You raised him. Jason is your son, no matter whose sperm it is. George added, You can't just walk away from him. He's your son now, even if he's not your biological child. I snapped, fury burning in my veins. Don't you dare lecture me about being a man. I yelled, Your daughter lied to me. She used Ethan's sperm and tricked me into believing Jason was mine. You're all as guilty as she is. Get out of my sight. George looked like he wanted to hit me, but I was done. I shoved past him, opening the door wide. Move. Now, I said, my voice low and threatening. When they didn't budge, I gave George a hard shove, sending him stumbling. Linda let out a scream, and one of our friends rushed in to intervene. The room was in chaos. People were shouting, trying to calm things down as I threw open the door. Jason, still oblivious to the situation, started crying, clearly frightened by the shouting. Rachel, meanwhile, was in hysterics, tears streaming down her face as she screamed, Daniel, please don't do this. But I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. Everyone out. Now. I demanded, my voice trembling with fury. Her parents continued to shout, You can't abandon your family. We'll sue you for everything. But one by one, the guests started grabbing their coats and heading for the door. Linda glared at me, muttering curses under her breath. George, still seething, had no words. Rachel, shaking, took one last step toward me. But I stopped her with a look. Don't you dare, I said, my voice low and threatening. We're done. Leave. Now. Rachel, broken and sobbing, collapsed onto the couch, holding Jason, who was still crying. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, where am I supposed to go? I didn't even flinch. This stopped being your home the moment you betrayed me. I said coldly, Don't make me call the police. Get out. She let out a choked sob, but for Jason's sake, she tried to hold it together, even as she whispered, Please, Daniel. But there was nothing left for me to give. She grabbed the diaper bag in her purse, and with one last devastated look over her shoulder, she walked out into the pouring rain, hugging Jason against her chest. I watched her leave, my heart sinking deeper with each step she took. The door slammed shut behind her, and the sound of the storm outside seemed to drown out everything else. Hours passed in a blur. I sank onto the living room floor, numb and unable to move. The remnants of Jason's birthday cake lay scattered across the coffee table, half-eaten. The frosting smeared in sad little piles, a sad reminder of what should have been a celebration. My chest felt hollow, a weight pressing down on me that I couldn't shake. The anger that had been building inside me was still there, simmering just beneath the surface. But instead of screaming or punching walls, I just sat there, staring at the single leftover candle. It was all that remained from our son's first birthday, the day I destroyed everything. A part of me seethed with righteous indignation. She had it coming. She betrayed me, lied to me, and now she was leaving with our child, my son, as if it all meant nothing. But another part of me, an aching, hollow part, questioned how love could twist so cruelly, How could we have come to this? How did it go so wrong? I sat there, immobile, for what felt like forever, my mind spinning, yet empty at the same time. Then, around 1 a.m., my phone rang. The harsh buzz of it cut through the stillness. It was a friend who had been at the party, someone who had witnessed the tension. Daniel, his voice was strained, as if he wasn't sure how to say it. You should know, Rachel's in the hospital. They say she had some kind of breakdown. Her parents said she fainted from shock. I tightened my jaw, holding the phone tightly. A wave of conflicting emotions swirled inside me. Anger, guilt, pity, each one fighting for dominance. Which hospital? I asked quietly, my voice barely a whisper. He told me the name of the hospital, but before he hung up, he hesitated. Look, man, I get it. You're furious, but maybe you should see her. This is serious. I gritted my teeth, and after a long pause, I responded, my voice flat, I'll think about it. And I didn't go. I couldn't. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. My lawyer had told me earlier that evening, after I'd explained everything to him. Legally, you're in a very good position to sue for paternity fraud. If you can prove she deceived you deliberately, she can't pin child support on you. You have all the documents, right? Yes, I had said, I do. And so I stayed. I stayed in my anger, in my rage. My phone flashed with more calls. No doubt from Rachel's parents. I didn't pick up. Each ring only fed my fury. Each unanswered call a small victory in my mind. The next morning, the sound of thunderous pounding rattled my apartment door. I didn't even check the peephole. I knew who it was. With a growl of frustration, I yanked the door open. There stood George and Linda, their eyes hollow and exhausted, as if they'd spent the entire night awake, pacing, worrying. Linda's face was streaked with tears, and George's jaw was set in a grim line. Rachel's in the hospital because of you. George spat, shoving a finger into my chest. His breath was sharp, and his words were full of accusation. She was under enough stress, raising a child without your support. And now you've thrown her out on the street with a baby. I stood firm, my eyes narrowing. She's there because of her own lies. I hissed, barely able to contain the venom in my voice. She did this, not me. Linda shoved past George, her voice dripping with fury. Daniel, you've always been so self-righteous. Well, guess what? This is your family, whether you like it or not. Whether that child is biologically yours or not, you're married to our daughter. You have a responsibility. I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. My responsibility ended the minute she decided to break our vows. I stepped closer to the doorframe, my voice icy and unyielding. You come here with your moralizing nonsense, but what about Rachel's betrayal? She did this for you both. She wanted a family. Linda screamed. You refused a donor. You refused. My face burned, a mixture of rage and humiliation flooding me. My semen's not defective. I roared, my voice carrying across the room. We had tests. Everything was normal. She refused to accept that sometimes fertility takes time. She took matters into her own hands with a dead man's semen. That's monstrous, and you know it. Before I could say another word, George lunged forward, his fist raised. The world slowed for a moment as I caught his wrist midair, my heart hammering in my chest. Don't. I snarled, the words coming out low and dangerous. Don't make this worse than it already is. I shoved him backward. He stumbled, almost falling into Linda, who yelped as she tried to catch herself. Then she started crying, her sobs choked and frantic. This is how you treat us after all these years, she cried. We welcomed you into our family, and this is how you repay us. I wasn't in the mood for this. You welcomed me as long as I was footing your daughter's bills and playing dad to a baby that isn't mine. I spat. Enough is enough. Linda pulled out her phone, brandishing it as though it were a weapon. We'll sue for defamation, for cruelty. We'll do whatever you want. I cut her off. Now get out. I slammed the door in their faces, locking it quickly. My blood pounded in my ears, the adrenaline coursing through me like a drug. For a moment, I feared they might kick the door down, but I heard their footsteps retreating. Then silence. 2 days later, I was sitting with my lawyer, Mr. Beckman, going over the final details of the divorce paperwork. He was an older man, methodical and calm, flipping through the stack of evidence I gathered. The cryobank forms, the receipts of procedure, a copy of Jason's birth certificate. "This is a clear case," he said, his voice detached but confident. "We'll file for divorce on the grounds of adultery, or at least fraudulent misrepresentation. The simplest approach is to petition to disclaim paternity. Paternity fraud. You can request an immediate DNA test as well, though the cryobank documents already speak volumes. You also have the texts and appointment records from the clinic." I nodded, not feeling much of anything. A part of me wanted to be satisfied, wanted to feel like I was winning, but it all felt empty. Was this really victory? I nodded, my mind racing with the implications. "Yes, I do. If Rachel contests, we can subpoena the cryobank. They'll confirm she used Ethan Anderson's sperm," I said, my voice a little shaky. The lawyer, a tall, no-nonsense man, pressed his lips together in thought. He had a calm demeanor, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. "Right, because there's also an ethical question with posthumous seed usage. Did she have explicit permission from him? In some states, that's only allowed if the man consented prior to his death." He leaned forward slightly, his tone serious. "This is going to be complicated, but you'll likely come out on top." A weight lifted from my chest as I heard him say that, but it wasn't complete relief. There was a sick heaviness in my heart. Too, I loved the child. I loved him with every part of my being, even if he wasn't mine by blood. But that didn't change the fact that Rachel had deceived me. I tried to push away the bitter taste in my mouth, but it clung to me like a second skin. The lawyer continued, oblivious to my thoughts. "She never told you any of this, did she? She essentially forged your paternity." He paused, allowing the gravity of the statement to sink in. "Now, in terms of child support, you absolutely should not be paying. The child is not biologically yours, and you can prove there was deception. You'll be severed from any paternal obligations." His eyes softened a little, though, "But you should also prepare yourself for the emotional fallout. This isn't just a legal battle." Though I felt a certain relief from hearing this, the anger swirling in me intensified. It wasn't just that I was being lied to. I felt betrayed, manipulated into a role I never asked for. I wasn't just dealing with a broken marriage. I was confronting the full scope of Rachel's betrayal. I wanted to help the child, but how could I when everything I'd known was a lie? We wrapped up the session soon after. The lawyer assured me that once the papers were filed, Rachel would be served, and the legal process would begin. I left his office with a strange numbness overtaking my emotions, anger, sadness, frustration all mixed together in an overwhelming stew. But there was also a trace of longing buried beneath it all, a longing for a family, the family I thought we were building together, the one that had been ripped apart by lies. Only 3 days later, the knock came. It was a little after dusk. Expecting more drama from Rachel's parents, I opened the door with a mixture of annoyance and dread. But to my surprise, it wasn't them standing there. It was Rachel. She looked awful, pale, with dark circles under her eyes like she hadn't slept in days. She was wearing an oversized sweater, her hands trembling as she clutched the sleeves. Seeing her like that, the woman I'd once loved, now reduced by the storm of our broken marriage, triggered memories of better times, of us laughing together, of hopes for a future that now felt like a distant dream. I almost stepped back, instinctively wanting to protect myself from whatever emotional turmoil she was bringing. But the bitterness hardened my spine. I forced myself to look at her coldly and blocked the doorway with my body. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice sharp. She hesitated, tears glistening in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might break down right there on the doorstep. But she steadied herself, her gaze intense despite her exhaustion. "Daniel, can we talk? Please." I stood frozen for a moment, caught between the desire to slam the door in her face and the small, still part of me that wanted closure. I didn't let her see the internal struggle. 10 minutes, I muttered, reluctantly stepping aside. She slipped past me with hesitant steps, crossing the threshold of my home, the place that used to feel like ours. We moved into the living room, and she sat down on the edge of the couch, wringing her hands together nervously. I stood opposite her, arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. "You filed for divorce," she whispered, almost too softly. "I got the papers." I nodded, my voice colder than I intended. "Yes." She exhaled shakily, her chest rising and falling with every breath, as if the weight of the moment was suffocating her. "Daniel, I know you have every reason to hate me, and I deserve it, but please just hear me out. Let me explain." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice breaking. I was terrified. I wanted a child so badly. You have no idea the loneliness I felt every month when the pregnancy tests came back negative. And then I remembered that Ethan had preserved his sperm before the accident. We had planned to start a family, you know? We had talked about it. She swallowed hard. The word stuck in her throat. I thought maybe this could work. Maybe it was still his donation. It wasn't from some random stranger. And if it worked, I could have the baby we talked about. You'd have a baby. And I thought, maybe this would fix everything. You'd be a father, Daniel. I told myself that once he was here, you'd love him enough that you wouldn't care. I clenched my jaw so tight it almost hurt. So you decided to combine your new marriage with your old one, as if I was just some afterthought. Did you even think about telling me the truth? Or was that just too inconvenient for your plan? Her face crumpled at my words. I was scared. Scared you'd leave me, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I could give you a baby, you'd stay, that you'd love him as much as I did. Maybe it was selfish, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let go of the dream of us, of being a family. I stared at her, disbelief and contempt mixing in my chest. So it justifies everything? Lying to me? Forging my name on paternity documents? Making me a legal father to another man's child? My voice was rising now, anger coloring every word. That's how you thought you could fix this? She trembled, sniffling softly as she wiped away the tears streaming down her face. I wanted to feel sorry for her. God knows a part of me did. But the anger I felt toward her for taking away my chance to be a father, for making me feel like a fool, was overwhelming. She had shattered everything I thought was real between us. I was desperate, Daniel. Desperate. Her voice was raw now, her plea hanging in the air. I know it's wrong. I know it is. But I couldn't stop myself. I stood there, staring at her, my mind spinning with everything she had just admitted. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I couldn't just pretend like everything would be okay. Not after this. Rachel's eyes were wide with panic as she stood in the doorway, a hand pressed against her chest like she was struggling to breathe. Her voice trembled as she spoke. You betrayed me at the deepest level, Daniel. I never stopped loving you. Even now, I still love you. Please, if we can't salvage our marriage, can we at least try therapy? I can explain everything. Maybe we can come to some kind of arrangement for Jason. He deserves a father figure, and you've already bonded with him enough. Please, just listen. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but the anger I felt had already built too high to allow for any kind of empathy. I snapped, stepping back, my throat constricting with a mix of grief and fury. My voice came out strained, but it was as cold as I could manage. The child I bonded with doesn't exist. That was an illusion. I'm not Jason's father, Rachel. He's Ethan's. Or more accurately, he's a product of technology, an experiment, brought about by your lies. Rachel's face crumpled as she reached out to me, desperate. Her hands trembled, her eyes pleading with me to understand. Please, she whispered, the pain in her voice unbearable. But I recoiled, disgust rising in my chest. Don't touch me, I bit out. My pulse was roaring in my ears, the betrayal she'd inflicted on me ringing louder than her cries. A sob tore from her throat, her whole body shaking. If you want me to sign the divorce papers, I understand. But I'm begging you, don't sue me. Don't drag this through the courts. I can't handle it. The hospital bills, everything. My parents can't keep paying for all of this. I'll lose everything. My eyebrows lifted in disbelief, the injustice of her words cutting through me like a knife. You can't handle it? I repeated, my voice rising with every word. What about me, Rachel? My entire world was turned upside down. I was deceived for over a year, humiliated in front of everyone. You had me dreaming about fatherhood, imagining my features in that little boy. Then, you let me discover the truth in the most revolting way possible. And now you're telling me you can't handle the consequences. She wept silently, her face a mask of regret and sorrow. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I was wrong. But please, we once loved each other. I did this for us. No. I shot back, my voice cracking with fury. You did this for you? You never gave me the courtesy of a choice. I couldn't keep myself from trembling with anger and hurt. Get out, Rachel. I'm not negotiating. Expect to be in court soon. Her face froze in shock, the heartbreak evident in her features. She looked at me one last time, then trudged to the door, pausing in the doorway to whisper, I really did love you, Daniel. I wish you could see that. She closed the door softly behind her, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the emptiness that had suddenly settled over the house. The silence was deafening. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings were already in full motion. Rachel had been formally served, and the weight of the finality settled over me like a dark cloud. The lawyer had swiftly handled the legalities, making sure everything was airtight. I had Rachel officially removed from the property deed. The house had always been in my name, purchased before we married, with a mortgage under my name. A swift eviction notice followed, despite the fact she had already left. My lawyer made it clear, don't come back. And she didn't. Her parents, in a last-ditch effort to manipulate me, tried to reach out, claiming I owed Rachel spousal support. They threatened to ruin my reputation in the local media. But I had already taken steps to protect myself, recording their calls and blocking their numbers, leaving my lawyer to handle any further harassment. The house, once a sanctuary filled with Jason's laughter and cries, now fell hollow. The sound of silence echoed through the rooms. It's better this way, I told myself, though the words rang hollow. The alternative was continuing to live a lie. Late at night, when I could no longer keep the tears at bay, I would think back to the day I first held Jason in my arms. I had believed, so desperately, that my prayers had been answered. That moment was the sharpest wound of all, because it had never been real, and the pain, the anger, the deep sense of betrayal would wash over me in waves. I let it simmer until exhaustion finally overtook me, and I fell into a restless sleep. The court case was swift and almost clinical in its efficiency. With cryobank records and undeniable proof of Rachel's deception, my name was officially removed from the birth certificate. Paternity fraud was recognized, and I was freed from any legal obligations to Jason. Rachel attended every hearing, looking fragile and broken. She clutched Jason to her chest, her face pale and tear-streaked. The child's wide eyes stared curiously at the bright lights of the courthouse, completely unaware of the chaos surrounding him. But I reminded myself again, he's not my child. The judge granted the divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and a deception. Rachel wept as she left, holding Jason close. Her parents, Linda and George, were present, but Linda's glare was the only one that met my eyes. George was nowhere to be seen. I felt nothing but a dull, numbing sense of closure. There was no relief, no joy in the outcome, only emptiness. The gavel fell. Without a word, I turned and walked away, leaving everything behind.